You are listening to Informed Dissent. If you're a longtime listener, welcome back. If you're new, welcome. Here's the lay of the land. I'm Jamie Reed, a lesbian and a whistleblower who worked inside a pediatric gender center. My first co-host is Lauren Leggieri. She's a lesbian and a longtime LGB activist. Our second co-host is Cohn. He is a gay man who underwent gender transition early in his life. All three of us come from the left. And none of us fit the story you've been told about who questions gender medicine. And that's not an accident. Every week, we cover the headlines you need to know across medicine, law, sports, and schools, and even prisons. And then we dig in, the three of us together, and most weeks, a guest that we think is worth hearing from. We built this show because we believe that the most important conversations about gender politics are the ones happening between people with real stakes and real disagreement, and free inquiry, honest argument, and dissent that's worth something because it's actually informed. We welcome you.
Hello and welcome to Informed Dissent. I'm Lauren, and here's your news of the week. The Department of Education has opened a Title IX investigation into Smith College for admitting trans-identified males. The Trump administration's position is that Title IX single-sex exception applies to biological sex and not gender identity. The investigation was triggered by a complaint from Defending Education, which got interested in Smith after the college awarded Rachel Levine an honorary degree and invited him to speak at commencement. Levine, if you will recall, is the Biden administration official who pressured WPATH to remove all age limits from its guidelines on gender surgeries for children. Smith does not admit women who identify as men. It does admit men who identify as women. The college says it's committed to both its institutional values and compliance with civil rights law. The investigation will determine whether those two things are the same. In California, the girls keep finishing second. At the Prep League Championship finals last week, 14-year-old Paul Haga, a trans-identified boy at Pasadena Polytechnic School, won the women's varsity 400 meters, edging out his older sister, Sienna, who competes for a rival school. He also helped his team win the women's relay. Sienna finished second both times. Meanwhile, A.B. Hernandez, a trans-identified male senior at Valley High School, swept all three girls' jumping events at the SAC Invitational, the long jump, the triple jump, and the high jump, becoming the first athlete to do so since an Olympian accomplished it in the 1980s. The DOJ has opened Title IX investigation. The lawsuits are unresolved, and the girls keep finishing second. The Department of Justice this week signaled support for a fair lawsuit against the Washington State Department of Corrections, which houses males and female prisoners together in the same cells, bathrooms, and showers at a facility nominally designated for women. The DOJ invited FAIR to formally request a statement of interest, meaning the federal government intends to tell the court how it believes the constitutional questions should be resolved. The case rests on the 8th and 14th Amendments. Incarcerated women cannot hold press conferences or run campaigns. The courts are their only avenue, and the DOJ's involvement matters enormously. The Department of Justice is busy this week because they also opened an investigation into 36 public school districts in Illinois to determine whether parents can opt their children out of LGBTQ curriculum and whether the districts maintain sex-based restroom facilities and sports teams. That's your week. And those are your headlines. For a more in-depth news analysis, please consider becoming a paid subscriber and get this week's complete gender news breakdown delivered straight to your inbox every week. And now, on to this week's show.
Today, we're talking to Ben Kowaler, journalist, playwright, comedian, and gay man based in New York. His reporting has appeared in the New York Post, Racket News, The Times UK, and The Free Press, where he hosted the sociopolitical interview series Ben Meets America and the 2024 election series Swing State Debates. He's a Harvard sociology graduate, a former contributor to Blocked and Reported, and his self-described style is, and I'm quoting here, humility, humor, and an almost compulsive lack of piety. That last part will matter for this conversation. Ben produced Strange Bedfellows when LGB Met T, a 3-part investigative and narrative series under Longview Investigations Reflector feed. Longview is run by Matt Ball and Andy Mills. If Andy Mills' names sound familiar, it's because he previously produced The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. So this is a team that knows how to build a serious, well-resourced documentary series on contested terrain. The full series is publicly available at no cost through the Reflector feed, and we'll link it in the show notes. Here's what the series covers. Episode 1, released March 20th, is essentially a 50-year origin story. It traces how gay men and lesbians went from being classified as mentally ill, criminalized, and socially exiled to winning the most successful civil rights campaign of the modern era. Marriage equality, employment protections, cultural visibility that would have been unimaginable a generation earlier. And then it asks, what started to change when trans activists began getting deeply involved in that coalition? Episode 2, March 26th, picks up with the arrival of the Q. This is where the series gets into the philosophical fault lines that were always lurking beneath the surface of the movement, but rarely spoken about plainly. The project shifted from securing civil rights for gay and lesbian people to something larger and more ambitious, a wholesale renegotiation of how society understands sex and gender itself. Those are not the same project. And the guests in this episode make that tension visible in ways that are hard to look away from. Episode 3, April 2nd, lands on the National Sex Education Standards. These are the curriculum frameworks that have quietly reshaped how sex and gender are taught in American schools. Ben spent time with the people who actually built them, Dr. Ava Goldfarb, Madeline Edelman, and Allison Macklin. And the conversation reveals exactly what the philosophical commitments are embedded in those standards, and what they tell us about the growing distance between gay and queer as political cultural identities. The guests across the 3 episodes are substantial. Dana Beyer is an early trans rights advocate who was present at the table when many of the key decisions were made. Jameson Green is another early figure in the trans rights movement whose influence on policy and medical frameworks goes back decades. Dr. Susan Stryker is the professor emerita of gender and women's studies at Arizona State, and one of the most prominent academic architects of trans studies as a field. Lori Jean ran the Los Angeles LGBT Center for over 2 decades, one of the largest LGBT organizations in the world. Ben Appel is a journalist and the author of Cis White Gay, a book that takes direct aim at what he sees as the weaponization of identity politics within the gay community itself. And then there is Herndon Gadrick. Gadrick served as the president of GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, from 2012 to 2013. GLAAD has been one of the most powerful institutional forces shaping media coverage of LGBT issues for decades. Gadrick appears across all 3 episodes, and in episode 3, he said something on the record that stopped us when we heard it. We're not going to bury the lead. Gadrick told Ben, on tape, on the record, I think we need to correct what's wrong first. And so that's a big thing. I mean, particularly the medicalization of children. Teenagers and kids should not be given the power to make these life-altering decisions that medicalization causes. Co-host Andy Mills pushed back in real time. Wait, so you're saying that the former head of GLAAD told you that it was a mistake to unquestionably support the medical treatment of these minors? Ben confirmed, yes. The former head of GLAAD, on the record. That's the conversation we're having today. Ben Kowaler, welcome to Informed Dissent.
Hi, Ben. I'm going to go
Hi.
ahead and start with a couple questions first, and we're all going to kind of rotate through because we have so much to talk about with this recent three-part podcast that you put out.
Okay.
So, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were the one who initially pitched this to Andy and Matt,
I did, yeah.
and it maybe took some convincing. So,
No, they loved it right
they
away.
loved it
Oh,
right
is
away.
this because of like my intro that I wrote about how they were like, get
Yeah.
out of our office?
Yeah.
No, Jamie, I was just being funny.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, was there a specific moment, though, when you went to pitch this to them where you maybe realized that the LGB to LGBTQ evolution had more to it that needed to be told?
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess it depends on uh who's listening. For me, I did not know the story of how even LGBT came together, how the T's came to be part of the gay and lesbian rights movement. I was sort of more conscious for the addition of the Q's, but I didn't really sort of like know how we went from gay and lesbian to LGBT to LGBTQ plus. And so part of it was like my own kind of research project, and part of it was coming from a frustration with the way this whole conversation has gone, because I think a lot of my close friends and family, people who are sort of instinctually supportive of individual rights, who are socially liberal, who don't like seeing minorities being demonized, uh, they kind of wonder, they might wonder what's happened to me, because I've taken a sort of more critical view of some of the what is now represented by the LGBT movement. And we also have some, I mean, speaking of strange bedfellows, like a lot of the most vocal opponents of the LGBT movement now are people who speak pretty hatefully and contemptuously. And so I think it's weird for a lot of socially liberal people to see other socially liberal people agreeing with some of those guys. And I would imagine that like they're either thinking, wow, like why have some of my friends like gone completely off the deep end? Or maybe they're thinking, have I heard all of this story? Do I is there something I'm missing here? And I'm hoping that there's enough of a sense of maybe I don't know all of what's happened here, that this will resonate with some people.
Without asking you very specifically, do you think that part of your own wanting to learn more about how the LGB and the T came together has to do with our age? So I'm 45, and when I reflect back, I don't remember the T being around, but I was part of LGB advocacy starting in about 1994
What
locally.
did it actually ever go by LGB?
So it was interesting. I started volunteering at an organization called Promo here in Missouri. Met my first girlfriend there, way back in high school, and I actually pulled out an old like pamphlet for one of our like galas, and the T was on there. And I
Yeah,
was even surprised, but I also had no recollection of any trans identified people being part of what we were doing then.
same. I mean, I remember seeing gay and lesbian, and I remember seeing LGBT, and I don't ever remember literally seeing LGB. I think people just sort of say that because bisexual was sort of. Oh, you differ, Cori?
Well, I want to remind you that for a long time it was GLBT.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and it was. Oh, yes, right. It did used to start with the G. Gosh, you
Yeah, it
would think
did.
that I'm apparently on the authority on this, and but yes, there sometimes you would see GLBT, and then
No,
it
always you would see.
always you would see. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
that's
then there
true.
was all these conversations of women are oppressed and lesbians are marginalized among gays and lesbians. And symbolically, we're going to fix that by putting lesbians first.
You know what, Corey? I think we missed that. I mean, like I wanted to make this a 10-part series because I just think there's so much here. But we wanted to we had to choose what to include, and I think I would have loved to talk to, had that sort of come up in my interviews. That would have been an interesting angle to include.
So let me ask you this. So without without going too far into it, I think it's fair to say to our audience, you're out as gay.
Excuse me.
And you've been so for a long time?
So long. I came out
Okay.
in 1999.
Okay.
Yeah, I was 14.
I was 14 too. Okay.
No, no, you weren't. Oh, when you came out, you were
Yeah.
14. Okay,
In
yeah, yeah,
94. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Get
Okay.
that.
So, did you feel any pressure when you were pitching this to Andy Matt? Did you feel pressure or were you using language where you saying like, I want to report from my community that you were wanting to pull the curtain back?
I'm not sh I was aware that that was part of the draw here, that it's and that I have, as some would say, privilege. I am in the privileged position of being able to sort of speak up about this because, if the movement is LGBT, I am one of those letters. That movement supposedly represents me. And so uh, maybe I have more credibility than someone who is not represented by any of those letters, who you might suspect is coming from a place of bigotry. And um, so I think that's part of the appeal here. There are a lot of straight people who are talking about this, and I don't know that they get the kind of traction that, I mean, you've gotten traction about this because you are a lesbian. I mean, that's or it's certainly helped. Um, so
Yeah. So, is it fair to say you came up through Blocked and Reported?
no.
Okay.
I mean, well, it depends on what you mean by came up. I mean, Block that Jesse and Katie were sort of my entree into the intellectual dark
Okay.
web, if people are still calling anything that without
Okay.
cringing. But I mean, I came up. I mean, in terms of my like professionally, like I started at the Free Press. I mean, I started at LA Magazine. I joined the Free Press in 2024. Was there for a while, and yeah. Um,
So I feel like when you're saying Blocked and Reported, the Free Press, we all know that there is kind of a specific editorial worldview that's associated
mhm.
with those kind of publications right now. Were you consciously thinking about that audience, or were you trying to think outside of that
No,
audience?
I'm actually curious. I mean, one of the questions I want to ask you guys is, did you learn anything from this? Because I think a lot of what was in this was geared towards making it clear to people who are watching this from the outside or from a point of view sympathetic to the LGBT movement who are thinking, why is this backlash happening? Like those are who I was. I mean, of course, I'm only getting attention from people who are sort of like already like who already see things the way you guys do, with some exceptions. But no, I mean, the I want to be an NPR. Like that's who I want to be talking to here. I want to be talking to people like my close friends and family who are under the impression that, and there's some truth to this, but who think that the backlash we're seeing to LGBT rights is coming from a place of hatred, bigotry, religiosity. Surely some of it is, but there's a reason that that issues surrounding gender have so much potency and were exploited so effectively by Donald Trump, or just I don't know if exploited is fair, but they resonate with people, and they resonate with people who aren't religious bigots. I mean, I've always been an atheist, basically, uh, and so it's just more complicated, I think, than the messaging that we get from a lot of the advocacy groups, which is that, you know, LGBTQ people are under attack from bigots.
Cori, I'll let you go ahead and talk a little bit about how, Ben, you got some of the individuals who participated in your podcast on.
Yeah. You know, I'm a co-host here on Informed Dissent, but I also have a little side project where we interview people. I'm not
Every
going to mention
time,
the name.
Cori,
Not
every
going to mention the
time.
name. Let's just let me set this up. We try to bring on viewpoints that particularly do not agree with ours because that's just more interesting conversation. If you're just
Yeah.
if it's a echo chamber, it sucks, right?
Yeah.
And it is so difficult to find anybody on any of these contentious issues, who wants to open up and just have a discussion about it.
Hmm.
But you had a couple of trans viewpoints or
Hmm.
viewpoints from trans identified individuals like Dana Beyer and incredibly Susan Stryker, who
Hmm.
maybe a lot of people don't know who Susan Stryker is, but if you were to say who's one of the architects of the trans rights movement, it would probably be Susan Stryker would be one of those names. So how did you get people to say yes to participate in your project?
I mean, I don't want to be so cynical about this, but I feel like I had one shot to make this. And I hope that that a lot of those people will listen to it and feel like I'm not coming from a place of hatred or contempt. And maybe they'll talk to me further. Um, but I guess, a lot of those guys could have Googled me and assumed that because I had worked at the Free Press that I was going to be hostile. And um, but they didn't, and I don't think that I read as hostile to them. I mean, the only interview I had that got contentious was actually with Susan Stryker, um, and there was a bit with Jenny Finney Boylan as well. The most interesting part of that was when I had said to Jameson Green, who I really got along with swimmingly. I thought Jameson Green is a trans man about around 70, I think.
Yeah.
And I said, because I think a lot of what the trouble with this topic is that language is so difficult, and it is very difficult to speak accurately about these issues in a way that isn't going to offend someone.
Yeah.
So I said to Jameson, if I were to describe your transness to someone who just didn't know anything about transness, I would say that you are a female that has taken hormones and perhaps had some surgeries to appear as if you are male and that you live your life as if you're a man. Is any of that inaccurate? And he said, no, that's about it. I said the same thing to Jenny Finney Boylan, but conversely, and she said, "Whoa, that's a really that's a I don't know if she said offensive or hurtful or, but
Yeah.
she thought that was not uh she thought that was a demeaning way of talking about her, um and we recovered, but but I know that I mean that seemed to stick with her. She mentioned it um afterwards in an email. So
Oh, interesting.
But I mean, I still really liked her, and I thought, I thought she liked me too. I mean, afterwards, she connected me with someone in the email. She said, "You could talk to this guy. I liked him well enough," or something like that. I don't know. Like, I really enjoyed talking to pretty much everyone I spoke to on this podcast. And in my fantasy, like, I wanted to have like a release party where everyone came. But I don't know. I'm crazy. I'm naive. I don't know. People don't. That doesn't happen. But the thing that got contentious with Susan Stryker was the that we kind of zeroed in on the fact that we have an irreconcilable difference in what we define as what is true. And, for instance, she believes that that male and female, that these are products of culture and products of history and not sort of universal truths, a universal reality about humanity, that there are males and females, and in every culture,
Mhm.
certainly there are different ways that people act, or different kinds of gender roles, or different, like that. Of course, there's a lot of diversity around that, but there have always been men who copulate with women, and therefore, and thereby like propagate the human race. So that this could be controversial is like I can't, and her feeling was that my understanding of the universality of males and females was rooted in sort of my position as a white male, a white man who's never had his very sort of like heteronormative view challenged. And but I thought it was a productive conversation because, like, if you listen to that, you're going to get the fairest reading of my worldview and Susan Stryker's worldview. And you can decide for yourself like who seems to be making more sense. Um, and I don't th and sort of so part of me, like, I don't mean to be snarky here, but so I kind of understand the tactic of not engaging, because for a lot of people, maybe not if you're sort of in this critical theory world where you accept as true the idea that like our entire understanding of reality is totally historically contingent and based on who we are, and there's nothing objective. You know, if you're not in that world, chances are you would listen to that conversation and not find her so compelling. I don't, if I may be so bold.
You almost have to believe in the tenets of postmodernism in order to even be a participant in that conversation, right? If
That's
you're
right.
not a postmodernist, you go, what are you talking about?
Right. And I always thought that, like, before I started looking into this, or like 5 years, no, I remember hearing like people who seemed to be more on the right, like talking about postmodernism and Marxism. And I always just thought like that this was kind of hysterical and sort of, you know, just didn't,
It
uh,
sounded like conspiracy theory to
it's,
me. I'm
yes, it
like, how
sounded,
is
so,
this about
right,
Marxism?
exactly. How is this about Marx? And like, in terms of drawing the connections between Marxism, it's I don't know that I'm on a footing to be able to sort of fully articulate that. I will say there seems to be like a great deal of overlap between people who identify as Marxists and people who believe in this sort of very socially constructed
Sure.
idea of gender. That doesn't seem to be controversial to say. Um, but yeah, a lot of the ideas about gender that the LGBT movement has taken on come from, or I don't know if I can say come from, but they are the same ones as are put forth in this queer theory. So, that exact sort of like mode of transport between the academy and and state bureaucracy, I don't know if I can articulate each step along the way, but it's the same understanding of gender as socially constructed.
So these feelings of when you talk to people and going, wow, that like your perspective is like shocking to me, or it's making me recalculate. Did you have a similar experience when you interviewed the former head of GLAAD, Herndon Graddick?
Well, no, because he's sort of come around. He's had an evolution in this a similar way that I have. In that he was very supportive. In 2012, he was introducing Jazz Jennings on stage and saying and all in on supporting trans identified youth and all this stuff. And he has come to assimilate new information, and he feels that it was a mistake for GLAAD to go all in on gender reforming care specifically for minors. And so, sorry, what was your question?
Well, it's as you said, your friends and family take it just as truth that these things are good for people, right?
Not all of them. I think most, but some of them do, and
Right.
it's
So having such an influential person like a leader of the movement come around and say, maybe we made an error, maybe we didn't have all the information. Does that
I oh, has that swayed anyone as far as I know?
Well, sure. Or even yourself when you were hearing it, were you like, oh my gosh, like not only am I starting to rethink some of my assumptions, some of the most important influencers are starting to like, I don't know if there was any of that type of
Um,
destabilization, I think would probably be a
I
good word.
I think I had been destabilized when it comes to um, children and medical interventions before I spoke to Herndon, just because this is an issue that I've been following for a while. We had the Cass report in 2024 or 23. So I was aware that the supposed consensus on youth gender medicine was not really a consensus, and that there was a lot of sort of politicking that was behind that. So it didn't change anything for me. I think that it's disappointing to me that the former head of GLAAD can come out and say, "Hey, GLAAD was wrong about this huge, hot button, very current social issue. And, maybe I just need a bigger following. I mean, I do, but like no one,
Crickets.
it hardly made any impression outside of this small circle of people who are kind of gender critical and as obsessed with this stuff as we are. So, um, you would think that Queer Tea, that The Advocate, that any of these publications, you've got a headline here.
Yeah.
Former head of GLAAD comes out against youth gender transition. Hello. So that's curious. And I think a lot of it I imagine that a lot of it has to do with not wanting to uh get on the wrong side of people who can just make your life hell online. Um, or just be irritating.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's more than just
It's
being
more than
irritating. I mean,
irritating.
people lose their jobs,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
could he have come out and said that if he were still gainfully employed at GLAAD? I don't know. Or would he be risking losing
I
his
mean,
job?
yeah, I mean, look, just because it is risking your job doesn't mean that you can't. I mean, I understand that that's a, Jamie, you risked your job to share with the world what you were seeing. I mean,
I don't have that
people,
job anymore, though.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you have another job now, which is, but I think, yes, people have a lot to lose by speaking out against this, but also, it just seems like that is a sort of a leap of faith that a person should take if they see something that they think is not right. So I, I don't,
Oh, I agree with you. I
yeah.
agree with you that I think that, I mean, especially when it comes to children, yeah, but the reality is we just don't live in a world like that. I mean, not everybody can afford to lose their job, especially if you're a teacher or a social worker,
Yes,
you know.
yes, yes. I know, I know, I know.
But podcasters, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, and also it's easy for me to have this kind of attitude because I came up in this, like whatever semblance of a career I was pursuing screenwriting in Hollywood for like most of my 30s, and then I got into journalism, and the journalism I got into was looking, I mean, this was one of the, I mean, this was the first thing I've done sort of specifically on this subject, but I was in a milieu that was all about sort of questioning the dogmas and so you know, this is easy for me to say because for me, like covering this kind of stuff, that has given me a career. Whereas who knows if I would be doing this stuff if I had like made it in Hollywood, if I had gone into journalism earlier, and I don't know. I don't know. So
Well, I got unfortunately a hard stop. I wish I could continue,
me too.
but we'll have to have you back and ask more questions. But for now,
Anything.
I'm going to hand off to Lauren, who has some questions as well.
Okay.
And I'm going to say goodbye. It was
Bye,
nice to meet you.
Corey. It's good
Bye,
to meet you.
Corey.
Hi, Corey. So Ben, you kind of describe yourself as the way you approach this is with humility, humor, and an almost compulsive lack of piety. So to me, that's a very disarming posture to take. Do you think that because of that, it's almost hard to pin you down as to where you stand on something? So do you think that style and that approach helps to change minds? Like, do you think it can change the mind of someone who's deeply committed, or were you looking to kind of have people who are a little more open be willing to question and kind of give them permission to question?
The realistic answer is the second type of people. That's the people I
Yeah.
should be trying to communicate with. Of course, I get obsessed with like the three people in my life who are still sort of clinging to this stuff. And I'm like, I gotta make this podcast for them. And it's like, girl, what, like,
Yeah.
relax. And it's not my job. If you start thinking that you have to do that, you end up just driving everyone crazy. You become an egomaniac or more of an egomaniac. I mean, like, it's So, um, but do I think like look, I think part of the reason is that of like me being hard to pin down. I don't know where I stand on most things. I don't know where, I mean, I've sharpened my point of view when it comes to a lot of these gender things, but I'm very sympathetic to people who want to live the that we all have one life on this earth, and you got to live the way that makes you happy. And as long as you are not hurting anyone else, I've always been a live and let live person. And when I'm talking to people, when I'm talking to Jenny Finney Boylan, even though I've read about uh, the psychology of transness, or at least I've read certain people's writings on the psychology of transness, and those sources would have me believe that because Jenny Finney Boylan is married to a woman, that means that her type of transness is autogynephilia, which means that she's attracted to the idea of herself as a woman, and that this is sort of tied in with that this is basically a sexual orientation. It's very hard for me to not give credence to what she's saying when she says, I've always felt that there was a part of me that was or I've always felt that the true essence of myself was female, that I am a woman, that I'm not a man who became a woman, I'm a woman who became herself, in her words. And now those same psychologists will say, well, this is the narrative that autogynephiles tell themselves because they have to, because they can't face the truth that they, and this is out of my, I don't know, but it is so hard. I'm not, who am I to say, no, Jenny, I don't think you actually have had this feeling all your life of you being a woman. I am not, I can't do that. Maybe some people can say that. I can't, it is above my ability to say that.
There's also there's also a shift there when you talk about theory and then you bring it to an individual. And individuals are so much more complex
Yeah.
and messy than theory. It's hard to take theory onto an individual and then an individual back to theory. And, I will just say, because you have brought Jenny up a few times, one of the critical books I did read going into working in a pediatric gender center was, I think her book is titled, one of her books was titled, She's Not All There, or She's Not Almost There. It was an early work of hers, but it did go through a lot of that transition. And I remember reading that and taking from that, similar to what you were talking about, which was this individualized perspective about this person's life. Um, and in terms of theory being applied to individuals too, I do recognize that it is challenging when someone transitions when they're already in a relationship. And if that relationship continues or not, doesn't always follow some of the theoretical frameworks that people like to transcribe onto those people. Why her marriage continued is different. And here I am. Usually use sex-based pronouns, but yet with this person, because I remember that book so deeply, I'm sliding back into using,
Look, I mean,
yeah.
if you can sell it, you know, I'm not going to go out of my way to use the sex-based. Like when I think of Jenny Finney Boylan, I think what can I do? I think she sold it. She's she-ish to me, and that's what she wants to be. Good for her. It's harder when someone really doesn't seem like they have transitioned, or that they. For me, that's when it's, I now still, like, if I'm interacting with them, I'll try and I'm not gonna be a schmuck. But you know what? She sold it. Dana Beyer sold it. Uh, because I know Dana Beyer physically. When I'm talking to Dana Beyer, like I'm talking to a lady. Of course, when you hear Dana Beyer, I remember playing this podcast for my dad, and he kept talking about Dana Beyer and kept saying he. I was like, who are you talking? Oh yeah, okay, because he's only hearing the voice.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I mean, I was always like very happy to accommodate this way of living. There are crazier things crazier ways to live. There are people who live very fulfilling lives in weird religious cults who are, who seem to be happier than the rest of us. I don't know. I mean, like, what's it cost me? But I think that the reason we're seeing so much pushback is that it's gone from it is now mandated, and it's being, and what part of what the podcast explores is that it's now been encoded like into law. And that's one of the things I didn't quite realize or put together until I did this podcast was that, like, unlike the gay and lesbian rights movement, where there was endless decades of debate over marriage, for instance, or years anyway, the changes that we're having the debates now after they've been instituted in the law. And they were instituted in the law because of the way that our government works, where agencies are sort of able to issue guidelines and then they're just sort of followed. I mean, the Obama administration released this Dear Colleague letter in 2016 that said kids need to be in schools, public schools, kids need to be treated according to their gender identity. And of course, back then it was before the non-binary and all these sort of nouveau identities had become widespread. So it was a little, I don't know that they quite understood the can of worms they were opening. But regardless, that was not a decision that was made democratically. It was a decision that was made by the administration. Now, of course, if everything that the country did had to go through Congress, like, we'd never do anything. So not like I really know the solution to this, but this seemed like a fairly, I mean, this was a pretty major decision that from now on you can self-identify into whatever sex you want. And because of Title IX from 1972, you're covered by that. I mean, that is a pretty radical decision that I don't think most Americans it was covered at the time, but it was covered. I don't know that people knew the ramifications of it.
No, they didn't. And also the way it's been covered also is it's difficult for people to understand what it actually is, because you'll be calling a man a woman in text print, or and you know what I mean? I understand the whole like, a lot of people just in polite society will use pronouns just to be polite. But when you're talking about disseminating information to the public in a news format, especially the
Mm.
written format, people cannot understand. They don't understand. So many people still do not understand what trans woman means. And then people are using different languages. Some people say trans woman, some people will say trans identified man. People don't, unless you're in this, normies, it's very easy to confuse them. So in the beginning of this, when people were saying trans women or trans kids or trans girls, they people largely did not know what that was. So they didn't know what they were getting into. If you had said we're going to let some boys into girls' bathrooms, I think there would have been a larger, quicker public response.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the fact that that so much of this is played out with kids and in schools and K through 12 schools, which is something that we look at in the podcast. I mean, that's also been a big part of it. In 2015, 2016, remember when there were these bathroom bills going around, and the messaging on that, they had, I think, some organization released this ad with this trans woman who looked like a woman was was going to be forced to go into a men's bathroom where there were all these scary looking men. And you watch that and you're like, yeah, that person who looks like a woman should be able to go and pee in that restroom. But that seems like, I mean, I don't, at least 10 years ago, it seemed terribly mean-spirited to pass a law that's going to mandate that woman appearing person should go pee in the men's room. And the message was, this is unkind and unfair, and we just want the dignity to pee and whatever. And those bills were defeated largely. Um,
But those
well,
are now back in a number of states, and we're seeing this come back again.
and it's way less sympathetic now, I
Um,
think.
Lauren, if you're okay, I'm gonna pivot over to what I have to attribute this to Lauren. Just thesis wise, so
Oh.
we listened to the part one and two, and then three had not come out yet. And I'm going to be honest, this was kind of our takeaway, and you can dispute this if you don't see it like
Oh,
that.
yes, let's have
But
some conflict. Good for the
okay.
ratings.
Okay. So we felt like by the end of episode 2 that the series was presenting a thesis that the
Mm,
arrival of the Q
mm,
was primarily the inflection point where things went wrong or maybe started to go off the rails. And that maybe it was the Q that was taking a civil rights movement and morphing it into a project to remake society's understanding of sex and gender.
mhm.
Did you think about this as the LGBT? And that, I mean, have you thought it was the Q? Is this part of your thesis?
What we wanted to do was to narrate how or why, to ask a question of why things started, why support started dropping around 10 years ago. And so it's not about like I wasn't sort of there to make a judgment call of like should the T's ever have been included. And one of the things that the podcast talks about is although I wish we had spent more time on this because I think there's more stories to be told here about like be how the T's joined this movement. And we talk about how these it was not clear at all to the gay and lesbian establishment that these were that there were shared that there were shared interests here. Um, and so there was tension earlier that was sort of smoothed over, I think. And because we were having so many wins when it came to gay and lesbian rights, everything just felt so positive and good. And we had these characters who were trans on TV, who were relatable. I mean, you had Laverne Cox, you had Transparent, which I still love. You have, you have it's I just don't think I can see why you would feel that I was making a sort of value judgment about the cues. I mean, at the end of the podcast, I talk about how these, you know, we can have a common language and we can all understand what's going on when we describe trans people the way that we all thought of trans people 15 years ago. There's a case to be made for a civil rights movement for people who wish to have who wish to change their body and live as if they are members of the opposite sex and want to do that without being hassled about stuff and that if you I mean there's a case to be made there and you can talk about that in language that is accurate, right? Even if Jenny Finney Boylan doesn't want to hear that, like you can describe being a transsexual with medically accurate language. You cannot do that when it comes to a new idea about gender that is undefinable, that really is postmodern, that cannot. I mean, at the end of the day, the folks who are sort of championing the Q-ness cannot define the words man and woman, male, female, cannot define the word gender in a way that's not circuitous. And I think there is a way to define all those things if you're talking about transsexuals. Transsexuals are people who've changed their body to align with the sex they want to
Okay, so
pretend that they are. But
let me try to mirror this back. So
yeah,
because early transsexuals were willing to acknowledge the reality of biological sex,
some of not. I mean, not completely. I don't want to,
I,
but
I would agree with that. That having worked with the trans community for so long, I do know that most of the patients that we saw in that time frame would not argue with you. They recognize their biological sex.
yeah, but of course they were in a place where that was supportive implicitly,
Yes.
so
But
it's a little different. But
but I
yeah,
think when we saw kind of that transsexualism, I'll get to the Q part in a minute. But if you really look at just the concepts around trans, I still think there is an inherent tension that is now more in the dialogue between lesbians and gay people because our same-sex attraction is based in a biological reality that's immutable. And there is now this dialogue and tension around, um, even if you get rid of the Q, if somebody medically transitions and they seek to define themselves, they are still pushing up against our ability to define our attraction based on sex. And
I
there
mean,
is still,
only if they decide that that's part of the project. I mean, I don't remember this being part of the project, shaming people for not wanting to be part of trans people. This is a fairly new phenomenon. Maybe you've been.
Oh, I do.
Uh,
I do. I
oh,
mean,
actually, you're right. You're totally right because that was actually the first one of the first projects of like the transsexual menace was like getting into the women's music festival. You're absolutely right. You're
yeah.
absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, and it was also too like 20 years ago when I watched all my lesbian friends transition, there were a number of them that insisted that they were now straight men and that their partners were in heterosexual relationships. I mean, this is 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So, and these are, again, these are very young lesbians. Everyone I knew in my youth were butch lesbians that transitioned.
This is I mean, I guess one is always learning, but I did not realize that there was such a wave of transitioning. I mean, I thought that that was more recent. So 20 years ago, you had a
but
sizable
not,
number
but
of
see,
20 years ago, I'm not kidding when I say every single one of my butch lesbian friends started to transition and was all within a 5 year span. The youngest was 19 when she started transitioning. And it immediately caused rifts in uh, in our friendship. I mean, because I was very early. I was like, this is not okay with me.
Mhm.
Mm-mm.
but
Um,
but but that is, I think what Lauren you're bringing up is part of the historical. I don't even know if it's tension. I think there was this some element from the gender nonconforming lesbians or maybe gender nonconforming men where they did feel like this is community because they were part of the transitioning cohort then. That
yeah, we were the generation where it was still
it
confined
wasn't
to
just straight,
mostly
right. It
homosexuals.
was mostly homosexuals who were transitioning then.
And yet, the early leaders of the trans movement, like when it was the transsexual menace, when it was, I mean, the folks that established transgender activism, qua transgender activism, were not homosexual males by and large, but were heterosexual males who, like,
Correct.
Ricky Williamson,
They've
They've
always
always been
been
the
in the
driver.
leadership and the driver.
which was totally news to me. I mean, one of
Oh
the
yeah.
reasons that, yeah, sorry, keep
But
going.
then what spills out is that's the driver and the but but when you think about even that DSM language and how it's presented, the driver is those heterosexual men, but the spillover is the who it fits for, the who is the target is the gender nonconforming
Yes.
homosexual.
Which is that's I don't I mean this is people don't know that. I mean, I
Yeah.
always thought, like I said in the podcast, that the T's were part of this because we all just thought they were like functionally gay men who were like so gay they were women. This
Yeah.
is not that's not what T was. I mean, there's been a and because there are now a lot of transsexual homosexual males, um, that the fact that there have always been some transsexual homosexual males is now sort of being like mapped onto the current trans movement. And so now part of transgender history, if you read Susan Stryker, are uh, are people who dressed in drag or who were sort of gender non-conforming in the 60s, 70s, whatever, but who were not actually organizing around politically organizing around the identity of being transsexual or transgender or whatever. So sorry, it's a lot, but
Okay, so I'm going to pivot to I want to go to the queue now. So the queue comes in, and the queue is, in some ways, it is not a medical, it is a political project. I think that even Brianna Wu has used that phrase to say queer theory, it's a political project. But it didn't arrive out of nowhere. It didn't just poof into the sky and then the LGBT was like, oh, hey, you fit in.
Yeah.
I think that it arrives specifically as a spillover out of like academic worldviews. It was conceptualized theory, but then that theory had to come out into the environment through organizations like GLAAD, like GLSEN. And you were really clear in segment 3, which was really striking when you were talking about the national sex education standards.
Oh, you listened to the whole thing?
Yes.
Oh, great, great, great. Yeah, yeah,
Yes. I mean, we paused at the end of 2,
yeah.
and kind of let it process for a bit, and then we heard 3.
Yeah.
And first of all, I thought it was really striking to look at it from the lens of schools because one of the criticisms that liberals I've heard make, and I'm from the left, is that this is not a problem this was a problem that the right had
It's
created.
invented. This is
It was
all
invented. And when you
propaganda.
actually think about parents and families in school environments, this is a real problem. You were talking, you had people in there from school board meetings. Like this was something that was hitting the kitchen table in America.
Well, I'm sure that people would say, "Oh, well, those people were activated by right-wing activists." And you know what? Maybe they were. Maybe there were right-wingers who showed them what was happening in their schools. But that doesn't mean that these things weren't happening in their schools, and that these parents might have been right to been like, "Excuse me, what are you teaching the kids?" Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, not a problem. But I guess my question here is, so you're interviewing Goldfarb, Adelman, Mack, like you're interviewing the people who were taking this theoretical principle, this queer theory principle, and they were disseminating it out into the public life. I personally think that they
Should be tried at The Hague.
no, 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 no. I personally think that they if they would have known in advance, if somebody would have shown them a crystal ball and said, if
Yep,
you do this, this is what it's going to
absolutely.
lead
I agree.
to,
I agree.
I think they would have been like, oh, we are not going to do
Yeah.
it this way. We're going to be
Yeah.
much quieter and much slower and much.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going somewhere different with that.
I think they didn't. I think that if they would have known the backlash was going to happen because of what they were doing, they wouldn't have done it. But do you not like,
Look, I mean, what was so interesting about my conversation with Eva Goldfarb, this was someone, at the she was coming from at least what she told me and what I could sense from her. Look, this is about teaching kids that however they are, they're okay. There's no wrong way to be a boy. There's no wrong way to be a girl. And we're all in agreement. And then it shifts into this gender stuff that says, no, actually, if maybe you aren't a boy, maybe you aren't a girl. I mean, we've been over this a million times. But this was a socially liberal, warm-hearted seeming person. She drove me to the train station after our interview. I talked to her for 3 hours. We enjoyed each other. She said, we need to get a drink and talk about this more. I mean, this particular contributor to the National Sex Education Standards, who was maybe in her 60s and who had been teaching in public health since the 80s, I did not get the sense that this was someone who was embarking on, who was leading a sort of surreptitious postmodern revolution. I mean, she may have been, and just not. I mean, but she's contributing to this new very unscientific way of understanding gender and teaching it to children. But I maybe I'm just a naif. How do you say that? Maybe I'm just whatever that is. But I it just seemed a lot less malevolent than it might seem. I think most of these people are just trying to do the right thing and just have not put it together somehow.
but putting it together would have to have an understanding of what actually happens from the medical pathway.
In what as
Well,
it
in
relates to
the
what?
sense that, I don't, I wouldn't disagree with the idea that something you'd want kids to know about in school is you can be any sort of boy, you can be any sort of
Yeah,
girl. Like
right.
that is the 80s kind of vibe we had.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but what the school segment was never, I just don't get the sense that they actually understood what it leads to. The concepts around queer theory then on the medical pathway leads to puberty blockers, cross-sex hormone surgeries, and
Well,
the
they're told that, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, but you were going to say
They're
that
told that this is medically necessary, that it's what kids need, and you have I don't have to tell you this. You have the leading medical associations saying this. There was a time when I was not ready to say, I don't really think kids should be taking these blockers. I mean, that is the power of authority to say this is what is acceptable and good. You can make people think that it is a good idea to sexually arrest the development of minors so that they can more easily pass as the members of the opposite sex. I mean, we know that just about psychological experiments, you can make people believe and do and act upon a lot of stuff. So when you have all the authorities saying this is what the kids need, and the people who are saying I don't think this is what the kids need, are this fringe group of like intellectual dark web people and people who just speak hatefully and who have never even liked the gays. What are these people supposed to think? I mean, who has the time to look into this stuff? If you're not already kind of invested in it, you're going to take
The media, journalists, they
I
have time to look into this and they could report
I'm
it more
not giving
accurately.
journalists a pass here. I'm not giving journalists a pass. And we talk about this in our podcast. GLAAD went from having this accountability list that was really a list of people who were anti-gay activists or politicians, people who wanted to prevent equal rights for gays. And they took that same ethos and applied it to journalists and anyone who wrote anything that they thought was detrimental to the LGBT cause. And they, and that's still up there, their accountability list. And the headline is these are the people that spread falsehoods and or false rhetoric. They basically say these guys are liars. And then they have a list of them. And you look at the list and look, I haven't looked at all 300 people on that list, but the journalists that have covered this, they don't cite any lies. They just cite reporting that is, they think, inconvenient to them about kids who detransition or about, so that's very powerful you don't want to end up on the GLAAD's list of bigots.
Yeah.
Especially because they throw such great parties. They'll give you a GLAAD Media Award. Seriously, that is part of their approach.
Yeah.
I just have one more idea around the T and the Q separation. So
Mhm.
I fundamentally believe that the Q, the queer theorists, were pushing a theory, and they might not have been the ones who were doing the surgeries or prescribing the puberty blockers, but I think that's how the T and the Q get tied together much more closely than the LG and the B. Like, I think queer theory is part of trans much more than I think those two are just much more closely married than adding the T to the LG and the B. That's just my personal kind of split.
I mean, it's outside of my. I can only talk about what I think may be true, and uh, you've always had, even before Q-ness, even before this stuff was widespread, you had people who identified as trans in the 90s who were talking in the same way that you hear Qs talk about now, about gender being this construct and everything. But you have also had people who have always wanted, for whatever reason, not because they read it in a book, but because they have wanted to change their body so that they can live as if they are the opposite sex. And whatever's motivating that, and my understanding is that a lot of that comes from sexuality, whether it's about optimizing or thinking you're optimizing your mating prospects, or you are attracted to this idea of yourself as a woman, and that's what gets you off. And I'm like, this is the most sympathetic argument. But if you have to do this to have a sexually satisfying life, who the hell am I to say you shouldn't do, like, what do I care? So, and that I think is actually the most compelling case for alliance between gays and lesbians and transsexuals. Because if transsexualism is coming from a sexual desire, and the only way you are going to live a happy sexual life is if you transition. Look, sex doesn't have to make attraction, romance None of this stuff, this is all, we don't understand how any of this stuff works. It's all chemical, it's all irrational, it's all what, you know. So if you got to do this and you want to be allowed to do this and you are not insisting that anyone else change the way they act, who would I be to sort of stand in your way? And I don't know if there's a different trajectory that could have happened here, where things didn't become so doctrinaire. Um, but sexual freedom, we all want sexual freedom.
Uh, Two responses. One is that I simply medically don't see these interventions. I think they might be
Mm,
part of the mindset for someone going into it, but what we know about how a lot of these interventions actually disrupt sexual function, I
yeah.
think it leads to me questioning,
Yeah, that's also a good point.
does that actually work out?
Yeah.
And then one more kind of point for me, and then I'll throw it over to Lauren. Um, I wish you did have more than 3 episodes because one other shift that has occurred
Mhm.
is the inclusion of the I.
Oh, we did a fabulous interview with, I think we might do a bonus, but
Okay,
yes, yes.
okay. So
It is the, sorry.
no, go ahead, go. Because
It's so ironic that the I is part of this whole thing because it is, I think, the most universally sympathetic cause if we're thinking about the same thing. And basically the ask of the so-called intersex community is that when children are born, when infants are born and their genitals don't look the way that the doctor thinks they should look, either to relate to their sex or whatever, just to stop fucking with these genitals because then you end up cutting off a clitoris for some reason just to fit people more squarely into these boxes. And that is where this conversation of how oppressive the gender binary is actually compelling because you are literally taking someone's body and disfiguring it so that they can fit into the gender binary. I mean, who's and it's non-consensual and it costs sexual functioning and it's just totally wrong. And so ironically, that message, keep doctors' hands off children's bodies because they cannot consent, is the same message that you hear from people who are opposed to much of the LGBT movement. And
yeah,
it's something. But you also
two
never hear about this.
two follow-ups for you to just run down though. One of the
Yeah.
things I find incredibly interesting is a lot of the pediatric gender doctors in the United States were also the same ones staffing the pediatric intersex, the DSD clinics. So
Oh,
I staffed, we called it DSD, the differences of sex development. I was
yeah.
staffing the DSD clinic once a month. And also I was hired for that clinic and the trans clinic, and they were medically the similar doctors.
And yet they weren't and their approach was to intervene to medically change the
No,
surgically change the kids or no?
The DSD
Oh,
clinic had
good.
gotten the
Oh,
message.
great. We're great. Okay.
Hey, the
Yeah.
compelling theory now is to leave unless it is
Right.
medically
Medically
necessary, unless
necessary.
the child cannot
Right.
urinate or
Right. Or
cannot
right. Right.
pass, like
Right.
to
That's
not,
fascinating.
yes.
That's
And so they're
fascinating.
the same doc. Yes. So
Yeah.
that, and then there's an excellent book called How the Clinic Made Gender that talks about how it was the medicalization in the intersex or the DSD clinics that drove a lot of the conceptualization around gender in the first place.
Yeah, well, I mean, so often you hear intersex conditions being invoked when you're talking about like whether sex is a construct or gender is a construct or not. Like it
Yeah.
always sort of goes to these intersex cases, and this is a whole other thing. But yeah, it's a sort of potent well, thing.
All right, Lauren, to you.
Okay, Ben. So I gotta ask. So, listen to the whole series. I was surprised when I heard my own voice
Oh
in that
shit.
last section. Um, you used some of my testimony. I think it was my testimony from Missouri. And so I'm curious. So where did you get the testimony?
Oh, Twitter,
And
I'm sure.
Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Because it and I'll let you go into like however you found it and how it ended up in the podcast or whatever, but I do have some questions as to like I wasn't named. Our
Mm,
organization wasn't cited.
mm,
And I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm glad it's out there because I
mm,
think that it does resonate with
mm.
people. But I don't know that I would expect if someone from HRC got up to testify that they wouldn't be named and an organization wouldn't have been cited. Because I mean, it's kind of it was a central idea to this podcast that there are dissenting voices in the LGB community, and a lot of those voices, a lot of those people don't feel like they have anywhere to turn to. They
Yeah.
don't feel like they have community. We have a lot of gay and lesbian people that feel unwelcome in the gay and lesbian community now. And I think it would have been really helpful if they knew that there was somewhere that they could actually reach out to, an organization that was representing them and their mindset, is particularly around this issue. Because a lot of us, I will be honest, a lot of us see it as an existential threat to our own existence. So,
I cannot argue with you. I mean, and don't blame me, Lauren, okay? I If I were in charge, it would have been front and center.
It would have been the
thank
Lauren
you.
Yeah.
episode.
But
Thank you.
the podcast was produced by
That's all I wanted.
by these heterosexual men, and when it comes to your lived experience, they just DNGAF, okay? What can I tell you?
Did you get an opportunity to, or was that just a clip that someone threw in, or did you see the entire testimony? Were you
Oh, I can't remember. I'm so sorry. I mean, I probably sent them that clip.
yeah.
I was not, the way that we did this was all sort of collaborative. I did not piece together all of the stuff. We have people who really know what they're doing. I mean, you may have noticed it sounds like a, like a pod, like it was produced by people who've worked
Oh
at
yeah.
Radio Lab
Yeah.
at the Daily. I mean, so I would send them clips. I would send in clips or things so I probably sent the whole testimony, and then we used
Yeah.
whatever to make the point. Were there parts that you felt like we should have included in addition to saying what you were from?
Put the whole thing in there, really. Well, the one thing I thought was could have added, I think, a little bit more context to why so many of us object to the medicalization of minors. And you do mention the DSM, I think, in the first episode about how they removed homosexuality. And I believe in my testimony, I addressed that the DSM criteria for gender dysphoria in children,
Is homosexuality.
yeah, I mean, it reads as my childhood.
Yep, mine too.
And there was a little bit of a back and forth with the rep, particularly asking me about being a member of this community
Mhm.
and don't you all just think the same thing? And so I don't know. I just thought it was a little peculiar to me that that part didn't get in there because it was so spot on to what you were talking about. Um, but anyway, I had to bring it up. I could not bring it
'Cause I
up.
think one criticism uh, that you could levy against it is that we said, okay, there's this rift, and there is this rift. I mean, we played evidence of this rift, but a person might say, okay, well, yeah, you've got people online talking about but are there any organizations? Has this been organized in the way that GLAAD is organized, the way HRC is organized? And I think that had we been able to say there are these organizations, that might have solidified the case that there's a sizable enough contingent of
Yeah.
people who are described as LGBTQ, to say that there's a rift here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
But
we
so
should.
it wasn't more like I just don't want to take a step too far in where you know what I mean? You don't want to seem like you've landed on an opinion. I don't know. Because we've definitely been painted as a extremist hate group, although we're basically a medical watchdog group for gay people.
Yeah. Um, we wanted to articulate to people what is driving the tensions within this movement, and
Yeah.
also why people outside of the movement have become less sympathetic towards the LGBT movement. And I don't think that I needed to be weighing in on any of that to tell that story. And we did sort of at the end, Andy says like, okay, well, where are you on this? And I didn't want to go through every issue here, but the point we landed on is if we can't agree on a common reality, it makes it very difficult to have any kind of meaningful coalition. And for me,
Yeah.
like the step one has to be that the language we use describes reality accurately and isn't incoherent. So
Yeah.
all of it is downstream from that for me.
Let me just ask you a couple closing questions. So,
Okay.
first of all, just the basics. Is there going to be a follow-up? Is Longview, are you going to be doing more of this or any more coverage on this topic?
I mean, look, I'm obsessed with this stuff. Like I would love to be like have like a weekly podcast talking about sex and gender and whatever. So we certainly have the material for it. We'll see. Maybe if there's a groundswell of demand from the internet for
Okay.
more of what's on the cutting room floor.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I'd love to keep talking about this stuff.
If you can share, have you heard anything from GLAAD or HRC
No,
insiders? No. Okay.
I
Um,
haven't, and yeah.
okay. So we have
Did you reach out to because you have the ex
Yeah, I
president
mean,
of GLAAD, you did.
I've sent a number of emails asking GLAAD if they want to be involved in this, and I was also on an email with Herndon to the current uh, communications person of GLAAD, like trying to hook us up, and I didn't get a response.
Yeah, well, no, they don't respond to us ever either. So
Yeah.
we
like
email them once a week.
Mm. Yeah.
this week we focused on Lambda Legal. It was
Yeah.
not GLAAD this week. It was Lambda Legal.
Okay. I'm
Okay.
less familiar with Lambda Legal. I mean, they got sodomy laws overturned, but that was 23 years
What?
ago.
It was. Okay. My last two questions. So we have two different kind of listeners. So we have listeners and supporters. We have adults who are LGB, and then we have parents who right now have kids and young adults who are caught up or somehow in their either they're identifying as trans, or these are parents who feel like their kids have been harmed, or we have a lot of parents. And one of the things that I hear from these parents and this emotional sense I get from these parents is that they feel like their kids are gays and lesbians who have been kind of brought down this pathway. And one of the things that they push back on our age group and us about is that we disappeared, that we won marriage, and we kind of the normie gays kind of took the step back and we disappeared from public life.
Public life,
Or that we
political. I mean that we were not.
political,
Yeah, that we
yes,
weren't
that
leading. Well,
we
we had achieved marriage equality. We had achieved broad social acceptance. What
my question to
yeah.
you as a fellow homosexual is, do we still owe the next generation of kids? Did we step away? Did we miss out on doing something for them that we could have done? And this is a deeper kind of
I believe in every man for himself. No one owes anyone anything. It's a doggy dog world out there. Um, I don't know. Did we? Uh, Look, I think that's what we're doing now. I mean, do we owe? I mean, in terms of staying in these organizations, I don't think that. I think a lot of the people who were in the organizations that left, people didn't see where things would be in 10 years. I don't think people knew that within that the inclusion of that this gender stuff would mean that you could self-identify without making any sort of medical changes into, and that this indeed postmodern idea of gender where you can make your own narrative and live your own reality. Who would have seen that coming if you're just sort of on a board of these organizations and the focus has always been on equal rights for gay people? I mean, it just I didn't see I don't know I didn't when I first started seeing this, I really thought it was just a bunch of online crazies making news out of fringe examples that ultimately were pretty insignificant. And it took several years for me to realize, like, oh no, this is a social phenomenon. This is a social phenomenon that is worth reporting on and exploring and talking about and acknowledging that it's actually happening. So, um, I don't know. I did not answer your question.
That's okay. It's just a it's just a it's just a challenging, I think, moment in time. And it's a challenging moment for a lot of us who are maybe in the Gen X kind of cohort to see what's going on in the younger cohorts. And I do think part of the push and pull right now is generational. I think part of what happened in these orgs is that young people came into these orgs and they felt like they were bringing the revolution with them, and we kind of handed them the keys.
One thing that occurred to me when you're talking about parents, and I don't know, what do I know about parenting? And I don't know any of these parents, but parents do not, who wants to talk about sex with your kids? The gender, the gender roles, the new gender identities. Maybe it is that most of these kids are gay. Well, it's a lot easier to come out about your gender identity than it is to tell your parents effectively, when I jerk off, I'm thinking of this, or,
Yeah.
So I wonder how many of these parents that are watching these that feel like that, I don't know. I don't remember. Like, I guess what I would say to any of those parents is, have you told your kid, if you're gay, like that's okay. You are okay. It's okay if you're gay. Because I mean, maybe they all have, and they're like, no, I
Many of
told
them
him that,
have.
asshole. I don't know. But like, sorry.
Many of them have. I think it's
Yeah.
more a problem of the social subtext that these kids are living in that lets them know that it is not okay. Especially if you are gender nonconforming from a young age, it's just pre-assumed that you are in fact trans. And the way that a lot of the like the
Now,
developmental trajectory of young gays and lesbians is that, like, for myself, for example, I was very gender nonconforming as a kid, always was, like practically came out of the womb with a baseball cap on and dirty knees. But I did not and could not link that gender nonconformity to an adult sexuality precisely because I
You were a
was not a
kid.
sexual creature.
Yeah.
Exactly. So all of those proto-gay things that I was doing, had I been puberty blocked, it would have foreclosed completely on my knowledge of my own sexuality. And kids can't describe sexuality that they don't
Hmm.
have. So
Hmm.
when they're describing themselves, they're describing the DSM criteria for what
Right.
it is to be
Right.
transgender.
And I guess in my mind, I was thinking of parents of teenagers, but yeah, I mean, parents, it's,
I mean, a lot of these parents are liberal and are accepting of gay people, and it boggles their mind. They're like, "But we're liberal. We know it's okay to be gay, but that's not the light. That's not the cultural stew that these kids are living in."
I mean, I look, it cannot hurt to say to your kid, hey,
Oh no, it can't hurt. But
and
yeah,
I would just, as like, I would first make sure you've done that. Um, that would seem to be the first thing that you could do. And beyond that, I,
or you can just have kids like ours who are like, "Ah, it's two moms," and they tell everybody. Oh, Lordy. Okay. So, Ben, where can people, first of all, find this podcast that we've been talking about for an hour and a half?
Okay. Okay. I'm a reporter with Longview, which produces the podcast Reflector, and I was the lead reporter on Reflector's recent three-part episode, Strange Bedfellows, which is about the evolution of the movement that goes by LGBTQ plus, or some variation thereof.
Okay. I think we've got that.
Yeah.
But you do some other work, and I have seen some other
Yes.
videos of yours. So, where else can people find
Oh,
this?
Google me. Well, I mean, I'm on Instagram, Ben Kowaler. I'm on Substack, Ben Kowaler. I need a name for my Substack. But anyway, Ben.
Well, you can pick a four-letter layered name for your Substack too.
Oh, like
Short view,
LGBT?
short view, the
Oh, right.
mirror, and
Yeah, I know.
yeah.
It's a lot. Yeah. So I just had a piece out in the Times of London about Korean skincare treatments that I went and got with my brother.
they
Crazy.
know what they're talking about with skincare. Uh,
I'm told I'm getting compliments on my face. I
Yeah.
mean, even more so than usual. So it's yeah,
Thank
and so
you.
that's out today and it's funny. So read
Okay.
that.
Okay. Thank you so much for being willing to talk to us, but also being willing to hear some of our criticisms and our engagement on your work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I accepted all of them, so there wasn't a lot of conflict here, unfortunately.
Thank you, Ben, for your time today.
All
Thanks,
right.
Ben.
See y'all later.
This podcast is produced by the LGB Courage Coalition, a registered United States nonprofit fully funded by small donations like yours. We work to promote evidence-based medicine, ending the medicalization of gender nonconformity, and advocating for LGB rights. Supporting this show means supporting that work directly. If what you heard today mattered to you, please like, subscribe, and pass it along. Word of mouth is how independent shows like this one survive. You can reach us in the Substack comments section or by email at lgbcoalition@gmail.com or through the contact page on our website at lgbcourage.org. We want to hear from you. And until next week, stay informed and ready to dissent.